All right. Good morning, everyone. Dr. Val here. Welcome to Coffee Chats. I left my coffee on the counter over there. It is a cold and rainy summer day where I am, which is a little odd. I'm still getting used to summers up in the northern country here. Today I want to talk about ketones and your brain. So this morning I was looking at some different studies that talk about what happens when your brain is exposed to a typical diet, including lots of grains, versus one that is on a low carb, high fat diet where you're getting a lot of ketones. The brain can only run on two things, either sugar or ketones. And that's a pretty important point when you're talking about diet and how much diet affects your brain. There's tons of neurological degenerative conditions that we're all pretty familiar with, Alzheimer's and milder forms of that. And we consider a lot of that to be normal aging. Well, your memory just gets a little rusty. I just can't remember things like I used to. More brain fog, we assume that's normal, that's a normal aging process. And the truth of the matter is, yes, there's more stress that comes on your body, and your body doesn't handle it quite as well as when you were 20. That's true. But your diet plays a huge role in how well your brain is protected from those stressors. So one of the studies that I was looking at this morning said ketones specifically actually protect the hippocampus, which is an area in your brain that is like the memory center and your learning center. So the ability to learn new things and recall, much of that is centered in this part of the brain called the hippocampus. When your brain is running on ketones, it actually builds up the hippocampus. It lets that part of the body repair. It protects it from damage. And they looked at this in biopsies, actually. Sorry, not biopsies, but like after, all I could think of is autophagy. Autopsies is the word I was looking for, where they took different people who had said this was their diet and this is what they were exposed to. They did autopsies and found the hippocampus specifically. And that was tested also they did biopsies in mice and things as well, where they actually showed an active healing process in the hippocampus. So the fact that just because you're getting old and your number of birthdays is getting bigger and bigger, that doesn't mean that memory loss and brain fog and trouble learning new things has to be a normal part of life. That is absolutely not true. And we see this in different population studies all around the world. People who have very different diets are cognitively sharp and, acting like a 60-year-old, even though they're 95, and they're out working and they have quick comebacks and their brain is running really fast. Memory is not a problem. And the ability to learn new things, teaching an old dog new tricks, that is not a problem in other cultures, especially like Mediterranean cultures where they eat a lot of fats in their diet. Mediterranean diet is very healthy for a lot of different things. A big part of that is because it's a low carb, high fat diet, not even as high fat as what I usually talk about, but that's the same premise. Those ketones, when your body is running on ketones and your brain is using that for fuel, it's very protective. The other part of that is that once you have brain damage like that, the degenerative brain damage, I was taught in medical school that that's not fixable. There's nothing that can reverse Alzheimer's. There is nothing that can change neurodegenerative decline. And we know that's not true either. There are a lot of studies that actually show that ketones in the body build up brain tissue. It takes down inflammation. It is very protective. It helps and stimulates the body in repair. So that is not true. And I've seen multiple studies on just people with Alzheimer's who incorporated coconut oil into their diet every day. And in a month or 3 months' time, they were new people. I mean, the fact that it is reversible, a lot of that damage and inflammation is what's causing all of these symptoms and the brain fog and the can't concentrate, I can't sleep, I can't think, I can't do any of that. A lot of that is just from the inflammation. And so when you flood the body with ketones, the inflammation levels go down because the brain is burning a cleaner fuel than the sugar. And it's amazing the symptoms that can improve with just adding fat to your diet, cutting out, being very low carb, cutting out carbs and sugar, that allows your brain to run on ketones. A study that kind of goes along with this, people say, I don't need to get rid of wheat. I don't need to, give up any of that. I don't have celiac disease. I have no problems when I eat wheat. So there was a short study. It was about a 2-week study. And they took this group over here and they said, okay, you have no issues whatsoever, but we're going to give you, this was a blind study. So the people didn't know whether they were getting the gluten-free diet or the regular diet. And what the regular diet meant was they were getting 2 slices of bread, either whole wheat bread or a rice flour based bread. And the people didn't know which was which. And that was the only gluten they were getting for a week. And they had this group go off and they marked their symptoms down. Every symptom you can imagine: sleep, irritability, mood, as well as GI symptoms, bloating, diarrhea, any pain, just every kind of symptom that might be linked to this. And they took these 2 groups of people and they put them either a gluten-free diet or a regular diet, including just 2 slices of bread a day. And they did that for a week, and then they reversed and they flipped it. And they put the gluten-free people on a regular whole wheat, and they took the whole wheat people and they gave them a gluten-free diet for 1 week, flipped it, did it for another week. In both cases, the people who were eating the wheat, the whole wheat, just for 1 week, had higher amounts of all kinds of symptoms: mood symptoms, depressive symptoms, sleep problems. Brain fog was huge. Versus the gluten-free, a lot of those other symptoms, skin issues, mood and irritability, sleep, pain, like arthritis, joint pain, all of those started to go down in 1 week's time. That's all it took. And that wasn't even, we say, well, that's not a huge wheat exposure, because generally people who eat wheat are eating it 10 times a day. Every time you snack on those crackers, that's considered a meal. And well, I had toast with breakfast. I had a sandwich for lunch. I had pasta and a roll for dinner. I had some crackers. I had some, tortilla, burrito, something for lunch. The amount of wheat that you take in, our food pyramid, as stated by the government, really is true, that our carb intake is massively more than anything else we eat. So when just in eating 2 slices of wheat a day, you are actively inflaming your body, versus getting rid of it for a week, starts to see massive improvement. The purpose of this was to study intestinal permeability with wheat. And there are multiple other studies that actually show this microscopically, that 1 exposure of wheat within 5 minutes starts to break down the lining of the gut and open up these tight junctions between your cells in the lining of the gut, and it starts letting things into your bloodstream that it's not supposed to be there. This is what is pushing this body-wide inflammatory response from eating wheat. And what some people will say, well, I have wheat, I have gluten sensitivity. I'm not celiac, but I have gluten sensitivity. That's now actually a recognized diagnosis, non-celiac gluten sensitivity. I don't know personally of any doctors that use it, but it was a recognized term about 4 years ago, that actually shows that it increases, that increased intestinal permeability increases body-wide symptoms. Has nothing to do with gut symptoms, but scientifically it's shown that that absolutely happens for every person anytime you put wheat in your mouth. The other thing is, once it gets into your bloodstream, it creates an autoimmune overactive response, which is driving these inflammatory things. Your antibodies go up and these inflammatory markers go up, but antibodies stay in your blood for not a week or two, not a month or two, but 3 months. Those antibodies are floating around creating inflammation for 3 months from one wheat exposure. So if you think, well, I only eat wheat once a week, do you think you're going to get your antibody levels down and your inflammation down if you're only eating wheat one time a week? That's not going to get your body down and totally be able to flush out those hyperactive areas of your immune system that are going against the wheat. It got there because of that process in the gut with increased permeability. The gliadin protein actually punctures through the intestinal lining, breaks the tight junctions. So you end up with molecules in your blood system or bloodstream, and that triggers all this inflammation. That's where it's coming from. There's all kinds of angles that are a cause of wheat triggering all of this stuff. So to bring it back to the brain, a lot of that that's affecting your gut, a lot of that inflammation ends up in your brain because the blood-brain barrier is very specific on what it lets through and how well it's able to sort of put a lid on that inflammation and say, okay, we got to calm down. The brain has some very specific mechanisms in the brain that are not a part of the body. And so once certain things get into the brain, it's really tough to get rid of it when the brain is burning sugar. Okay. So your blood-brain barrier, which the blood supply has to go through the brain, just like it has to go through anywhere else, but it has specific additional barriers to get into the brain tissue. But because of that, there are certain things that can't get in. There are certain things that can't get out the way that the rest of the body works. But if you're thinking of, okay, what's destroying the gut barrier, you have to think it's also having a very similar effect on the brain barrier and that blood-brain barrier that's meant to protect the very fragile nerve tissue. So the good news is that ketones are that really protective molecule that help repair the lining in the blood-brain barrier. They help repair actual parts of the brain that make it easier for those neurons to reconnect and to get rid of the damage and the inflammation and the plaques and tangles of a lot of these fibers that will create so much brain distortion. So even if you're like, but I don't have any brain issues, do you have any idea how much brain fog that we walk around with on a regular basis? It wasn't until I started cycling in and out of a ketogenic diet that I was like, oh my word, I can feel that switch in my brain turn on when I'm running on ketones. And it's like, suddenly you actually see the world the way it was meant to be seen. You can function, you can think. I didn't even know that my brain was sluggish before. I thought I was doing okay. You know, I can juggle things. I can think. I'm a smart person, right? It wasn't until I actually would go in and out of ketosis that I can feel that shift. Like within 20, 30 minutes, I'm like, oh my word, it feels like now suddenly my brain has switched on, and you have no idea the capacity that your brain can run at. So ketones are super important for your brain health. Don't forget it. And there's so much science around it. A great book, which echoes many of the things that I talk about, is Grain Brain by Dr. Perlmutter. This is, this is his whole life plan, which actually has the how to do it, meals, what to eat, grocery list, that kind of stuff. But his original book, Grain Brain, goes through a lot of the science and the studies and how our brain is affected by that. But just be encouraged. Just because you have memory issues, you can't think straight, everything's just fuzzy, I can't cope with things. Your brain can be healed, but it starts with what you put in your mouth. So I hope that's encouraging. If you have questions about this or want to know more, comment ketones below, and I'll get you some more information and love to answer your questions. And I hope you have an awesome day. Thanks.